Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And should the debt ceiling be abolished? And will the GOP dig in on slashing Social Security and Medicare? These appear to be the big questions of the day now that it's starting to hit the mainstream media, that Republicans are desperately trying to figure out how to put together a budget or legislation to fund the government, or let me rephrase that, to overcome the debt ceiling that would dial back on Social Security and Medicare. One of the proposals that Republicans seem to be very fond of is raising the retirement age for Social Security and Medicare from the current 65 for Medicare and 67 for Social Security, raising it up to 70. That's brilliant, right? It's going to be really popular. It's fascinating to watch this play out because, in 1990, whatever year it was, 5, I think it was, when Newt Gingrich first drudged up this 1917 Liberty Bond law, which established the so-called debt ceiling. It had never been used as a political weapon before. I mean, Congress just routinely, every year, it was just an accounting thing, raise the debt ceiling. And Newt Gingrich went to war against Democrats. I mean, absolute war. Now, truth be told, that war had been first declared by Ronald Reagan in 1981 when he, went after the unions, PATCO, when he went after Democrats more generally, when he, et cetera. And Gingrich was just, getting with the plan. But here Gingrich realized he had a weapon that could be used to beat Democrats over the head, to force them to dial back their out-of-control spending. And he used that to go after Bill Clinton. And it worked. Bill Clinton dialed back spending, cut back on welfare programs, limited most federal welfare programs to 5 years. So this is the end of welfare as we know it. Cut back on housing supports, cut back on just a whole spectrum of programs that were, remnants of the Great Society, of Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. And the consequence of that was that it increased inequality and increased poverty in the United States, but it did produce a balanced budget. And frankly hurt the Democrats badly. I think it's one of the reasons that Al Gore did not become president in 2000, although, frankly, I think that Al Gore actually won that election, but that's a whole nother rant. So during the Clinton presidency, they used the debt ceiling as a club. During the George W. Bush presidency, when he ran up, he put into place almost $3 trillion in tax cuts for billionaires. It's actually turned out to be more than that over time. That's the projection over the first decade. And George W. Bush also, in addition to the massive tax cut, committed us to $8 trillion of spending with 2 illegal, unnecessary wars that led to the death of 7,000 Americans and hundreds of thousands of Iraqis and Afghans. I don't know if you heard, or Afghanis, I don't know if you heard the NPR report this morning. No, I'm sorry, it was BBC. It was the BBC podcast I was listening to last night as I was going to sleep. And they had a reporter in Afghanistan, and they were talking to these families who, Afghanistan right now is experiencing the harshest winter in over a decade. And hundreds of people have died of being frozen to death. And this woman was talking about just going to get water, going down to the river to get water for her family, burned her hands and feet so badly that the skin is peeling off. She got frostbite. And they interviewed another woman who had a coat on, but it only came down to just below her elbows. It was, it was some leftover thing from the U.S. military, and it didn't fit her. And it's just tragic. But that was what George W. Bush gave us. So anyhow, they kept raising the debt ceiling throughout Bush's presidency. Hey, you want to have a war? No problem. You want to have tax cuts? No problem. And then, of course, Barack Obama comes into office, and it's like, oh, where's that debt ceiling? Yes, let's use that to beat up Barack Obama. And Obama let them beat him up with it. and said, oh yeah, okay, let's, Simpson Bowles, let's go with a chain CPI. Let's cut back on Social Security benefits and slow down the growth of those programs over time so that inflation will go faster than Social Security and Medicare do, so that we can, quack, quack, quack. And thank God Bernie Sanders came out, held a press conference and said, I will block this in the Senate. And a bunch of other progressives joined him. And that was the end of Obama's little flirtation with austerity. But he produced a balanced budget, too. I mean, he danced to the Gingrich tune as well. It wasn't Gingrich at that point, but, he danced to that tune. And then, of course, you got Donald Trump into the White House for 4 years. And what did he do? Another $2.5 trillion in tax cuts for billionaires and big corporations that you and I have to pay for. And, I suppose you can't blame him for the spending for COVID, other than the totally incompetent way that he handled COVID that led to the death of over 1 million Americans. But, another couple of $1 trillion being spent on COVID. Was I saying $1 billion before when I was talking about the debt that was being run? If I did, I meant trillions. But we're talking trillions of dollars here. And so now we've got this massive debt. We're over $30 trillion in debt. And the Republicans are using the debt ceiling to try to beat up Joe Biden. But this time I don't think it's going to work. Biden is saying, no, I'm not going to negotiate with terrorists. If you guys want to cut spending to reduce the national debt, Biden has already cut the national debt by $1.4 trillion, or the deficit. The deficit in this year's deficit, which was last year's Biden budget, this year's deficit is $1.4 trillion smaller than the last Trump deficit. Now, again, cut Trump some slack, something I don't like to do, but I do believe in being honest on this program. A large part of that had to do with COVID. But nonetheless, Biden has cut the deficit. The deficit is your annual contribution to the debt. And he's now saying to the Republicans, okay, you want to cut spending? Tell me where. And they're just running around like chickens, bumping into each other. I mean, it's a sight to behold. And now Mitch McConnell came out yesterday and said, well, if the House Republicans want to cut Social Security and Medicare, that's up to them, but it's not going to happen here in the Senate. In other words, you're on your own, guys. So, for years and years, the Freedom Caucus, the Cokehead Caucus, they've been taking money from the Koch network and other right-wing billionaires, and, who all want Social Security and Medicare, or many of them want Social Security and Medicare to be eliminated altogether or privatized. They don't think it's an appropriate function of government, and will, tell you that with enthusiasm. And they've always been able to kind of get away with trying to force Democrats, this is the two Santa Claus story, to try to force Democrats to shoot the Democratic Santa. And now the Republicans are going to have to shoot that Santa themselves. And I don't think they're going to want the fallout from this. I think this is going to be a really bad thing for them in the 2024 election. And I think they're figuring it out. And then on top of this, now they've got this thing that Scientology proposed years back. And some Scientology people apparently in Congress got a promise from Kevin McCarthy that he would bring it to the floor for a vote. They call it the fair tax. And what it is they're going to eliminate the IRS, eliminate the income tax for everybody, corporations and people, and fund the entire federal government with a 30% sales tax nationwide. So your eggs go up 30%, your gas goes up 30%, your rent goes up 30%, your car cost goes up 30%, the cost of buying a new car goes up 30%. Absolutely everything goes up 30%. That gets skimmed off off the top. And who does that tax hit? It hits people who spend most of their income. Most Americans in the bottom 90% every year spend 100% of their income, which means 100% of their income is taxed at 30%. Most billionaires every year spend maybe 1% of their income, or 1/10 of 1% of their income, or 1,000th of 1% of their income, on their housing and their homes and the things. And so, they're paying 30% tax on very, very little and paying no tax whatsoever on everything else. And the Republicans think this is a good idea. And Kevin McCarthy is like, yes, we're going to have a floor vote on it. And I don't know why CNN and MSNBC are not talking about this, because I think it's a big deal. And it should be treated as a serious proposal, because the Republicans are actually seriously proposing a 30% sales tax on everything in America. And this would be on top of your state sales tax if you live in a state that has a sales tax. I don't, so, it's incredible. Obviously, we need to abolish the debt ceiling. It's an unconstitutional law. I am hopeful that the Biden administration will just ignore it and get moving along. But let's call these Republicans out.